Okay, so now recording the TST call for August 8th. We have a number of items on the agenda today, but let's get started as usual with shout outs and the acknowledgement. If you check your chat window, you'll see that I posted a link to the acknowledgement page just to remind everyone. I know that we've had some shout outs that don't get recorded there, so please do go add them to the page.
And it's helpful for me, this is David, it's helpful for me to have you put it on the page because I can retweet that and copy and paste and share it out on Cord community channels to make sure people really see the acknowledgements and get the recognition.
Thanks. Anyone want to volunteer anything? Okay. Bill was not able to make the call, but he wanted me to remind everyone about the TST election process. Let me see. There is the time. I was just looking for the timeline here. So we're looking for nominations through the 18th, and then from the 20th to the 31st, we'll be voting. The biggest thing that people need to check at this point, other than volunteering or nominating folks, is to make sure that you are on the list of draft voters, the voting list, which Bill assembled. I'm hopefully now showing my screen. I will also paste the URL. So if you have any problems with that, as the page indicates, send an email to Bill. Any discussion or comments on the TST elections? Okay. David, you wanted to talk about the brigade call?
Yes, just briefly, I wanted to let everybody here know that we're starting next Wednesday, a monthly Cord Brigade call where we can go into more details about status and issues with Cord brigades and also share best practices. That's something we've been doing with ONOS brigades, and it's a useful way for the brigade leads and brigade mentors to, talk about issues, support, and then learn about good ideas and tips. So we had been talking about brigades in these TST calls, but the good news is there's now over 10 Cord brigades, and that list is just going to keep growing. So we felt like there just wasn't going to be enough space in the TST call to go into details about 10 or more brigades. So I know adding another meeting is not probably something people have tons of space for, but it's only once a month. And if you're a part of those brigades, it's going to be a lot of value. We're going to share good tips and tricks and other things that we've learned from other Cord brigades and ONOS brigades. So if you're a lead or a mentor on the Cord brigade, I think I reached out to everybody, but if you didn't see an email from me and you want to be a part of that, let me know and I can add you to the invite. But it's going to be Wednesdays. Right now we're currently thinking at 2. We're going to have to see what time works for everybody. But Wednesdays at 2 every month. So just reach out to me if you want to be on the invite. It's also on the Cord community calendar.
Thanks, David. Okay, so the next topic, maybe this is partly kicking off a discussion that we're going to likely come back to. And let me jump to the page. This is just having to do with release management. And in case you weren't aware, there is an outline of stuff that we've discussed on these calls. I basically took a draft from what ONOS had and tweaked it according to things that we've been discussing and things that are more germane to Cord than to ONOS. Let's see where to start. So I guess the point that Yuan made a minute ago when she was asking to make sure that we discuss this is just the clarification that when we do releases, we tend to focus on the platform because it's a core piece. It's been changing very rapidly. Other stuff gets built around it. But in reality, what we're really doing, in my view, is we're pulling together a distribution. It's like a Linux distribution. We've got a kernel and we've got some packages we assemble, and that is our release. Other people could pull together other releases. And hopefully we are getting very, very close to the point that even if we keep producing releases every 4 months, the platform is not a new platform every 4 months. And that likely is going to show up in some version numbering at some point. We may be doing release 12, but we're still back on platform 4.2 or whatever it might be. So take a look at this. Hopefully there won't be any particular surprises. The one thing that we have Ian and I have been discussing and also discussing with the MR and Acord teams is a plan that while we're doing maintenance releases at like 3.0.1, if we ever release a version, let's say, of 3.0 that includes now eCord, and it didn't include eCord before, that's as though we've added a new set of features to that release. And so that would be, we can just use another word for that. It's not a maintenance release, it's a service release, or you could think of it as a feature upgrade release as well. And there we would likely increase the minor version number. So what we're looking for and expecting to have happen in the not too distant future is a 3.1 release, 3.1.0, which would add, for example, the most likely first candidate will be eCord. And the other thing to note that timing wise, we're not necessarily going to get, even though there's a lot of work going on right now to get mCord up to spec on 3.0, and Volta will eventually, there'll be a version of rCord that includes Volta that will hit the 3.0 platform, and likewise for Acord and mCord. Those aren't necessarily all going to come at the same time, and they're certainly not necessarily going to come before the release of Shared Delusion. And so, A, just making everyone aware of that, and B, what I think that means is, and this is what we need to discuss, is there's going to be probably a 3.1, maybe approximately at the same time the 4.0 release distribution comes out. There might, in fact, then be a 3.2 that comes out, let's just say hypothetically in October, perhaps followed by a 4.1 that brings those 3.1 and 3.2 features up to spec with the 4.0, or included, I guess, in the 4.0 release. So that's just broad scope of this. We still need to understand better what the timing of all of this would be.
So, Larry,
yeah,
is there a point in 3.1, 3.2 then? If doesn't 4.1 make more sense at that point?
Well,
if it's October or November that's happening.
It's a good question. It's a good question. So let's say 3.1 does come before the release, or approximately the same time. And then let's just say hypothetically it's mCord that happens in October. So should it be a 3.2 or should it be 4.1?
Well, it depends on which API you built it to, right? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, it seems like we're not really at the point where we can say, okay, this is a long-term stable release that we will support for the next couple of years, right? 3.0 is not meant to be that. As soon as we have 4.0, we'll tell people move to 4.0, right? So making sub-releases based on older releases maybe is less important than, what I'm saying is 4.1 or 4.2 is more important than 3.1.
Yeah, that's you've nailed the issue, and the argument, and I can go in either way. The argument for going ahead and doing let's just call it a 3.2 as an example. Then let's just pick mCord or Volta. I think probably fits, rCord probably fits this as well. Is that there's been a lot of work to hit the 3.0 platform threshold, and that is a valid bit of work, and we hope that getting from there to a 4.0 or 4.1 would not be a huge amount of work, and that we would hit it fairly soon. I wouldn't certainly want to continue to support 3.2 indefinitely, and we can debate this, and it really comes down to what the TST decides, but at some point in here, there was reference to how long we would support old releases, and it's not very long. So we would continue to support 3.1, 3.2 while we're while we're in the midst of the 4.0 release, but probably not beyond. So that would give you some sense of urgency to actually get upgraded to the 4 platform. I think it would. I think there's, if you look at it from an MCord perspective, they're working very hard to hit 3.0, or based on the 3.0 platform. There would be an audience for that release. It might be a month before it got upgraded to 4. It's kind of a judgment call there. I'm not sure which way you would argue that one.
I think for now we are already moving the 2.0 to 3.0. All the existing sections we already moved to 3.0, and we also hope to, and those days we are adding 2 more new features to the 3.0. I think that's roughly all for the 3.0. The 2 new features they are working on it now. I think maybe it can be finished in August, I guess. Then roughly we can when we release the Cord, the entire Cord version 1 with the EPC, I think we will use this version again.
So I think this comes down to platform versus distributions, right? Because one of the things we had talked about was the services may need to stagger their implementation with the platform because the latest version may be, since it's in progress, the services may not be able to work on it actively. And so the platform would be at 3.0, but technically the distribution is a separate entity, right? And so I think we need to view it in that perspective where we have a stable platform, it's released, the services are staggered with that, and then they'll be bundled based upon that version of the platform.
Yes, and
so
I think,
with each,
in fact, you could do a distribution that supported both the 3.0 and the 4.0 platform APIs, and therefore it could take a combination of the two, in theory. The challenge in my mind right now is we're kind of just at the cusp of that fork in the road where the distribution and the platform decouple.
And part of the reason why we really need to do this is also, as the services are looking at what they need to do, they'll have requirements on the platform. And the requirements are probably going to fold into the next version of the platform, right? So I think what we need to do is make sure that we start staging out the requirements so that, right, we integrate into the platform, it becomes ready, and then the services can build off of that. Otherwise, if we're all in lockstep, we're not going to be able to get the service requirements in.
That's right. We have to have that decoupling. The other, so you're absolutely right. In principle, everything you said is where we need to move to. The challenge, in my mind, is that 3.0, while a substantial step for, let's take Mcord as an example, it was a substantial step to get from 2.0 to 3.0 for the platform. 3.0 represented, from a platform point of view, kind of a way station where the hope was that 4.0, which we're hopefully soon will be releasing, was where we really wanted people to get to, and it would put us in that stable state of the API not changing on people so often. So I think if we had an agreement as to where we wanted to go, which I believe it is a decoupling of the platform and the distribution, it's just a matter of navigating the next couple of months as the 3.0 services are available, and we'd really like to, as quickly as we can, get them up to 4.0 on the platform side. And to Saurav's point, do you do a 3.2 way station, or do you try to make the jump all the way to 4?
I think some of the other things we had also talked about is cadences of the releases, right? Platform versus distribution.
Yeah. Well, so there's a high level point here, which is that if we start thinking this as a distribution, which I think is right, and and that's every periodically you bundle together a kernel and some packages. Maybe we really ought to go to something more like every 6 months instead of every 4 months, and then the platform is free to upgrade at whatever pace it wants to, and all the users of the platform likewise.
Well, I think we still need deterministic cadences for the platform minimally, just because we want to make sure that the requirements are coming in, and this way the use cases can anticipate when their features are going to be delivered for their next release.
So could we imagine, I'm just thinking out loud, that we stay on a very regular scheduled cadence. Let's just suppose it's 6 months, just to break out of our current mold on the distribution, and that the platform is more feature-based releases hypothetically. They wouldn't even both have to be quite so. Sorry, we could adopt. What I'm trying to say is we could adopt a different model for the platform. Every time there's a new major feature that somebody needed, there's a release cut, and whether that bumps the major or the minor feature release number is entirely a function of standard practice of how big the change was affecting the API. Would that break everyone's sense of the right way to do it?
I think whatever cadence we end up doing, it would also be good to work as a group to figure out what would be in the upcoming distribution, right? So that we can anticipate, for example, the cadences of when the use cases are, when they're expecting to be able to come into the distribution, the requirements of the use cases on the platform, so that we can get all those staged out.
Yep. Well, so that's where this conversation started, and just in a very, very narrow version of it is eCord. It sounds like, based upon sprint planning, is very close to having a service release, which we can call 3.1. It'll very likely could happen before Shared Delusion is released. Ping, how, I realize this is a little speculative, but how soon would you be able to release a version, a 3.0 version of mCord that includes the things you want to include in it, that the mCord team wants to include in it?
Indeed, the mCord team planning, because there will be an entire mCord release, including not just the platform, also the BNF software together. So that's what maybe probably happen in, I guess, maybe in October, I guess. I remember we talked about this before. So for a very stable version, as long the deadline is about October. But if you in the eCord and ACord, they plan for the 3.1, it looks they planning about maybe still in August. So I think for that purpose, I can ignore the 2 new features, make the current all the services stable for this release.
So I know that MWC is a factor, and that's also mid-September. My understanding is that you wanted the splash of the release of the open source EPC mCord 3.0 at approximately that time, but it sounds like maybe.
Larry, yes, the next month is the MWC demo, and our plan is to finish it before the September. But before the September demo, but I see your timeline on the wiki page is August. So we will try to finish the 2 features in the August. But our high priority is really because the 2 new features, all the collaborators need it. So, but for the existing features, all the collaborators need it. We must give that one high priority to make those things stable. The 2 new features are relatively the second priority. Yes, we will. Our plan is make it happen before the September MWC and make it stable in October. This is the time schedule.
Okay. So you're distinguishing between demoware, certainly. I mean, I understand that the MWC demos are paramount. So let's just make that assumption. And having a stable release is likely then to follow perhaps a month. So that's why you're talking October. Did I summarize that right?
Yeah, right. Because that's why the first MCO release, we should make all the features we have stable at that time.
Okay, so it is still conceivable that we could point people at Garrett and say, it's still, we could call it beta or whatever. If you really wanted to get to the code you saw demoed at MWC, it is available. We just have not officially tagged it as a stable release yet. I mean, we don't currently have a formal process for beta or anything like that, but we could informally do something.
Yeah.
Okay, so then back to Saurabh's point, when we get to October, the question is, do we call that 3.2 or do we call it 4.1? And I guess that really comes down to if there's enough time to take that extra, hopefully modest step of bringing it up to speed with the 4.0 platform or not. And we can make that call when we get there. If we did call it 3.2, the plan would still be to get a 4.x out sometime in the fall that moved us off of 3, because we do have ultimately the objective of not having anyone dependent on 3, because we don't want to maintain 3 indefinitely.
I think if that I don't know. Then I don't know how big difference between the 3.0 and 4.0. If there's no big difference, we can move all the things to 4.0.
Yeah, I would like to say, and the assumption has been that it's not a huge deal. It's fairly modest because it's mostly about getting rid of attics and simplifying things. But there have been some model changes, and these things just take more time than you expect. But it might very well be worth going straight to 4. So we'll make that call when we get there.
Okay.
So can we do something similar to last time where there was a document that was created with kind of the new functionality or diffs? So the 2G to convert a service to the next version of the platform?
Yeah.
This way.
The 3.0 to 4.0 conversion migration document will have to be done. Yep. And yeah, we'll absolutely do that. The other thing is that from a priority point of view, during this release period of shared delusion, there was a lot of platform work that still needed to be done. During the next release cycle, Satisfying Cactus, one of the top priorities, I believe, of the platform team will be to help people get from 3 to 4. And so hopefully that reduces the time it takes as well. So I'll try to summarize this, and I've been in communication with the team leads so that we can try to get a handle on this, but sort of scoping out a tentative plan, and beyond that tentative plan, we are at the fork in the road where we should be able to treat our releases, and at some point in the not too distant future, we'll discuss whether it needs to be 4 or 6 months. But what we're really putting together are distributions of Cord, packaging together various parts, platforms plus services, and the platform will get on a different cadence probably than the distributions. But in case you weren't aware of it, haven't looked at it, take a look at this document, and any issues that you see, we can discuss at future meetings. Okay, so the next and I think the last topic is a proposal from Criterion Networks to do a learning lab. And from the TST point of view, I think what this comes down to ultimately is some guidance and oversight that if this is going to be an official learning lab, and by the way, this is Criterion is a for-profit company. They have their own business models around this. But I think it's in the Cord open source project's best interest to make this as help this be a success. And we have to figure out exactly what, whether TST blesses it or offers advice, critiques it. That's still kind of an open discussion to have. But let me turn the floor over to some folks from Criterion to talk about what they want to do. So who is there? Naresh?
Hello, Larry, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Yes, so this is Srinivas. Both myself and Naresh are on the call. So currently, as Larry has just mentioned, we are planning to have a Cord learning labs where we have a few hours of Cord learning lab exercises where people can gain some hands-on skills with, around Cord. So what we have, currently right now is an outline of the Cord learning labs, total 16 hours that we are basically planning to put together, which is already in the works. So we are kind of looking to make sure that with respect to the Cord learning labs outline that we have, so we want to basically have some critique or some oversight or some comments with respect to the TST team. And then based on some of the outline critique, and then we are basically would be coming up with content for these learning lab modules. And again, we just want to make sure that there's some oversight, some review of the content that we are coming up. Essentially the goal is to make sure that the Cord learning labs is as useful to the community as possible, and that's where we want to kind of take this forward. So Larry, Naresh can actually share the outline if that would be appropriate, or how do you want us to kind of take it forward? Take things forward.
Let me pass the presentation rights to him. Just a second. Okay. Should have presentation rights now.
Sure. Can you see my screen right now?
Yeah, we see it. Great.
So at a high level, as Srinivas summarized, we have sort of broken down the modules into three parts. So essentially the idea is that for a complex framework like Cord, we have multiple elements that are interacting, and we thought it would be a good step if you can break down into multiple small modules, in which in the first module, if the participants can get an understanding of the infrastructure layer itself in general, the Open switches that we are having with the framework, and how they essentially interact with an ONOS controller without having any XOS or anything in the first place. So that in case the idea here is that once they get the familiarity, later on when the applications become complex and they start programming the rules, they should have a good understanding in terms of the multi-table pipeline rules of how to dump the flows of each table, how the packet moves within and in case of anything is not working, how they can quickly troubleshoot. And so that this gets a familiarity both on the infrastructure layer as well as on the controller layer in terms of what are the important commands to debug, etc., for the developer and the test community going forward. So that is in that direction, we have the initial set of exercises on the infrastructure layer, and specifically in the multi-table pipeline rules and exercises around that. And then we bring up the ONOS controller and the relevant applications. We program some rules so that it helps in terms of understanding the ONOS GUI, the important ONOS commands, etc.
So I had a comment. Since you're calling this a Cord lab, and then within that an ONOS lab, while it's okay to start with very simple topologies, like you say, the linear topology, for relevance to Cord, it would be useful if in this ONOS lab you consider the topologies that are actually used in Cord, like the leaf spine fabric topology, or even what we do with VTN, which is the overlay networking topologies.
Sure, sir. I think that's a good point. So I will include the leaf spine topology. And on the network, on the overlay part of it, we have slightly covered on the second part of it. Maybe I'll just see if that is what you're inferring. Else, I will just take that comment as well, the first lab. So I have taken the notes for the leaf spine topology. And maybe I'll just quickly go to the module so that we can have a discussion on in case of anything is missing here. So in the second module, here we are going to have the interaction between the OpenStack, which is a key component, and the ONOS, right? So so the idea here is that to get the familiarity with the OpenStack services, again, for those who are new to OpenStack, again, not necessarily going to too many OpenStack projects itself, but what are relevant to the Cord context. So we bring up the OpenStack lab with the ONOS controller integrated to the Neutron, and we try to create the tenants and the user multiple roles, explain the Horizon GUI, how to understand that, the relevant services, and we try to upload some images using clans. We create the two VMs in the virtual network, and here the emphasis is mainly to understand the network of virtualization with how does actually the packet rules happens within the system, and how to do a packet trace from one VM to another VM in the complex network, right? So and again, from the ONOS perspective, how to check the program flows. So this, I think, is mainly going to be closer to the Cord framework, except that the orchestrator in picture, this is going to be the second important piece that we are planning to cover.
So again, in this one, I would recommend that you put some thought into whether you want to reflect the use of OpenStack in Cord, or rather OpenStack networking, that is Neutron in Cord, or OpenStack networking in general, because the way Cord uses OpenStack is in Neutron, it's in a very limited sense with the VTN app that we use in Cord. A more complete representation of Neutron in ONOS is the Sona app, which is a different thing that is not used in Cord. So when you're doing this part of the lab, be aware that Neutron is used in a limited way when used in Cord with VTN, as opposed to Sona, which uses this Neutron in a more complete way, but is not used in Cord.
Yeah, I would agree. Doing some background or kind of simple cases around these make perfect sense as a lead up. But I would think as people come out of these modules, they're going to want to better understand, just as sort of was saying, how this is used in Cord, so I can use that for troubleshooting purposes, understanding overall Cord. So it needs to build up to those use cases that we see in Cord.
Sure. So definitely when we're referring the Neutron ML2 plugin for ONOS, yeah, definitely the Neutron is going to be mostly like a REST proxy, which forward the commands right to the VTN app. So we'll be having that as a focus here, and the emphasis will be mainly in terms of the Nova services, in terms of bringing up the machines and the virtual machines, and any of the interactions on the networking. We'll try to have the focus on the ONOS, as you mentioned, on the VTN app, and so that it can lead up to the Cord for better troubleshooting later on. And the third lab is where we're going to have the exhaust in addition to the OpenStack and ONOS. So here we'll try to, we'll explore the exhaust GUI, and I think this service is already coming as part of the bring up. So we'll try to have the virtual subscriber gateway and the virtual OLT application. So the idea here is that we'll try to simulate a client so that we essentially use this service, and how can one have again a packet walkthrough from the client to the across all the multiple open switches and all the flows and the multiple tables. So we'll try to have a clean walkthrough of the packet flow here. And so the idea here is that the developers will get an understanding in terms of how do we trace a packet in case of something is not working or anything like that. And the next one is mainly to develop any new service from a development perspective. So if we have any thoughts in terms of any service that we may need to inject here, it will be great. Or the key right now, the idea here is that already what are the VSG service what we already have a models around that we already built in. So if this can help from a development perspective, while the third one is mainly from a network implementation perspective, I mean how the packet is forwarding. This can be set up as a context for the developers in terms of what kind of key modules are how can the workflow software architecture workflow happens in terms of creating the services, so that if you can create a new service so that that can reflect in the Exos GUI as a new service along with the VSG service or anything, so that they can get a complete idea in terms of building a new service. So this is the fourth exercise that we thought we can have it in the 6 slides.
Is the outcome of this one really that whoever's working through the module will have created a new service, like walking through the example service as part of the deployment today to build it, or come up with a custom one?
There are two parts to it here. So one thing is that to get started with, to understand even the example service, whatever we have. And once we've gone through that workflow, if you can have a new custom service that is already deployed, may not be, but maybe with a different Docker container, not necessarily whatever the Linux, whatever the machine that the container that we're having, if you can have a different container and if you can try to model a new custom service, I think that will be a logical end of this exercise. Just two parts here: the explanation of the example service and the new custom service.
Yeah, having someone onboard a new service, obviously with a lot of forethought into what it would be an easy one to do, would be good. So maybe this was just a minor point, but it kind of ties back to Saurabh's point earlier. You've got VSG and VoLT, but not vRouter. Is vRouter come out in that earlier infrastructure where Saurabh raised the leaf spine question?
Right. At this point of time, we do not have the leaf spine fabric as part of this infrastructure. So we are trying to have the client directly have a data bridge connection to the compute node itself. So so in case if you try to have the vRouter application with the leaf spine fabric, at least at this point of time, we did not cover that part of it. So do you think that will be a good addition to this? Because these two are two things, at least from an overlay networking and the underlay networking perspective, we just try to cover the overlay networking here and the relevant services.
So you can emulate the underlay network in software switches as well. If your concern is to be able to have hardware for this class. So I certainly think that it's a essential part of the Cord networking platform as well as the RCord use case.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I would recommend having it. Yeah.
And the fabric is emulated in different, like I've said, with software switches, so you should be able to make something like that work.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. So I have taken the notes for the leaf spine fabric edition and the vRouter along with the other complete notes here. Okay, sure.
So this was a 15-minute presentation / feedback. The bigger question, I think, is what kind of interaction, relationship, reviewing, endorsing, or whatever we want to establish going forward. We'll take.
Yeah. So from.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So once after this presentation of the outline, incorporating your inputs here. So what we thought is that the third week of August, around or August 20, what we thought is that we'll come up with the first draft of the module 1, so that we'll have an overview with the team, with the respective, I believe we'll have a different reviewers for each module. So we thought we'll have a dialogue starting with them in terms of once a module is internally shaped up within the company itself, so that we can share with the reviewer or set of reviewers, so that they can provide the comments in a week to 2 week window phase, so that we can incorporate, and maybe that is next set of dialogue is something what we are looking at.
So one question I have as I go over this is, from a target audience point of view, is this, I attend these modules, I follow these modules, I come out of this as a Cord certified, service developer, I come out of these as a Cord certified operator, I come out of these as a Cord certified, core developer. I'm trying to understand the target audience, because the modules might be different if my expectation is, look, I don't want to develop a service. I want to be able to use Cord as an operator, versus I want to develop a service. There's two kind of tracks there. I'm just curious, what kind of target audience are you looking at?
I think the first two are maybe essential for as a base thing for both of them, for the operator as well as the developer, because even if the developer, when he's trying to push the flows, he may need to debug. So we may need to understand the first two modules as a base thing. So in the module 3 is where the differentiation might come up in some sense, that we can break down into sub modules. Essentially the final thing is mostly for the service developers, may not be a core platform developer, so who is trying to implement new services on this platform. And the first 3 parts are mainly from an operator perspective, in terms of understanding how the GUI works and how can he provision new services. So maybe we can, the focus we can try to categorize in some sense, that the first, maybe if I try to divide this module 3 into module 3 and module A and module 3B, module 1 and 2 are basic, and module 3 will form for the operator, and module 3B for the developers.
All right, thanks.
So yeah, maybe we can have that representation come out in our platform very clearly, so that we can have a choice of who he is initially, so that only the relevant modules can be displayed for that kind of requirement.
So I think this is going to take some community volunteer time to provide this feedback. And I'm not sure, I mean, we may have lots of volunteers, we may not. So that's the thing yet to be determined.
I mean, wasn't this meant for profit?
Yeah.
So you can't just open it out to the community and ask them for feedback here.
That's the tricky thing we're trying to figure out. Yeah. I mean, so we can see this high level version of it, and then we can offer exactly the kind of feedback we've been offering. It seems less likely that that's going to be publicly posted.
Yeah, so currently the plan is for us to kind of enable, based on your high level feedback, these labs, at least on a pilot basis, from as early as September 1st. As Naresh was basically talking about, we'll basically have, even before, September 1st, at least a week earlier, we might have some modules that are basically available, right? So we are hoping that we can basically provide the access to the, where we basically have enabled these modules with the labs, and hoping for some review feedback and people who kind of try it out within the period of time. At least the game plan that we have right now is to kind of, with some blessing, take it forward towards middle of September. At least those are the timelines we had in mind, and based on what review feedback and other inputs that basically come up, we can kind of adjust or kind of have a game plan that works for all.
So yeah, it seems to me like the the interaction is going to be at a fairly high level, although I suppose you could choose to show a lot of detail in a subset of your material. You know, in the same way Amazon will show you a chapter of a book.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Well, I don't know. I don't know if for ONF to endorse it, I don't know if seeing a chapter of a book is going to be enough. To be honest, you know, ONF people are not going to, or yeah, at least ONF people are not going to be taking this class, so to speak, right? So I don't see why under NDA or something everything cannot be shared, and we would be able to guide and direct it.
okay, so
That's
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I think the idea is for at least folks who would be reviewing the material, basically kind of make sure that they kind of see everything, right? And then, yeah, so they should basically have access to everything. I mean, yeah, I mean, with the caveat that, yeah, it is under NDA or it is basically some copyrighted, I mean, thing from, I mean, Criterion Networks, right? So under some umbrella, we're basically trying to make sure that, yeah, everything along with the labs and each, I mean, everything with respect to learning labs is actually is available, right? And and post September 15th, I mean, for people who kind of sign up and there, I mean, again, all these labs and content would be available for use. So we are hoping that we can basically share all the content with the reviewers to make sure that it gets, yeah. And again, I mean, the model with respect to ONF and how we basically work, I mean, that's under discussion. So, I mean, definitely we're looking for making sure that there is a review process so that we are all basically bought into the quality and the effectiveness of the program.
Right, and I think folks like Timon and Nassim should get involved just to make sure those things are handled.
Yeah. Timon has been involved in this. So the point that was just made that I want to draw attention to, and I don't know the right answer, is it ONF endorsed or is it community endorsed? And that is the question I don't know that we have figured out an answer to. And clearly, if it were ONF endorsed, then the review under NDA is a much easier thing. If we're looking for TST/community endorsement, that's another matter. So I don't know what the right, like I said, I don't know which of those is the appropriate thing to do.
Larry, if it's perhaps members of the community could endorse as individuals.
Well, certainly, yeah, that's right. It could be broader than just
That's right.
ONF, and you could get testimonials, you could all kinds of official reviews like that.
Yeah, an endorsement from Rick McGear wouldn't mean very much, but one from Larry Peterson might carry some weight.
Is there any other feedback or comments, thoughts on the general, either specifically or on the general issue? All right, so we'll keep iterating. Timon, I'm pretty sure he's not on. Well, maybe he's in Menlo Park. Are you there, Timon?
No, he's traveling this week.
Okay, I didn't think he was available. So Timon is also in the loop here, and we'll watch for the next rev of this and figure out the right way forward. Is there anything else? Okay, thank you.
Larry.
Yep. I didn't hear that.
No, we are good here.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Oh, Larry, one more thing. When we had discussed the feature set for this release, I think some things became outplan. So were there any concerns about the features that are outplan?
Could you remind me what that list is?
It's the list we have for the new one. So one of them was dynamic onboarding of the services.
Yeah, dynamic onboarding is probably the big one. The synchronizer refreshing is another. Getting rid of the admin GUI was a third. Yeah, I think let's take those up next time specifically, because we're not going to do it justice here. And it really kind of comes down to how much we can cram into this last sprint.
One thing I'd like to put on the agenda for next week, Larry, perhaps for the brigade meeting, is this potential of Canadian government funding for intern participation in at least the brigades, and perhaps the Cord effort more generally. I sent you a mail about this about 3 weeks ago.
So just to bring it to everyone's attention, what is your perspective on it? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about it, but for everyone else's benefit.
Well, there's a Canadian government organization called MyTax, or sort of quasi-NGO, whose primary focus in life is to fund Canadian university students at internships, either at companies or sometimes working on open source projects. I met with a vice president and a director there about 3 weeks ago on one of my visits to Victoria. And they gave them a briefing on what Cord was, that I said that I thought that this was potentially hugely disruptive to the telecommunications industry, and that it was an open source project that I thought Canadian students might, particularly people in networking, might want to get involved with. They were extremely enthused and said that they wanted, and said, and this is a quote, "We should go big on this." And said that what they really needed to see was Canadian company participation and wanted more and wanted more details on it. So I mentioned Sienna to them. They're also interested, by the way, in Canadian subsidiaries of American companies. And I sent you mail about it, saying that we should really follow up with people who knew more about the Cord project than I did and were higher up in it than I was, and also asked them to get back to us. And nothing has really happened for 3 weeks, but it's the summer, so that's perhaps to be expected. Anyway, I just want some direction on what the next step, on what you would like to do as a next step, and in particular, Canadian companies or contacts that we could put them in contact with.
Right. So, tip of a bigger iceberg, we probably should have a concerted government funding type effort. Last week we approved the University of Utah and Cloud Lab as a collaborator, and that puts them in a really nice position to support, for example, MCORD, and I would anticipate they'll go after government funding to do that. We've never had any kind of official plan on that front. So, all right, so let's put it on the agenda for next week, and between now and then, start a discussion. And I think we probably also need time on this as to how we can do something coordinated and not just a bunch of one-offs.
Yeah, and also, Larry, I think David Bainbridge both organizes some brigades and works for Sienna. Is that correct?
Yes.
And David is as Canadian as they come.
Yes, but you have your Justin Trudeau beefcake T-shirt.
I used to have it. Well, I knew someone with a Tim Hortons mug. Does that count?
Hey, I'm drinking from a Tim Hortons mug right now. David, are you in Menlo Park?
No, I'm in San Jose, but I can get to Menlo Park when I need to.
Okay, well, I'm in the Bay Area. Perhaps we should get together.
So let's
absolutely.
We'll do.
My 2 cents on this is that if you're going to put it on the agenda for the TST call next week, it would help to understand what is the ask from the TST.
Yeah.
So just thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this, yeah, this may be a little
Container team.
orthogonal to the TST. In the end of the day, this might be an ONF strategy thing, as to, you know, we've got people that are responsible for membership. We've got people responsible for partners. This is a little bit less technical and maybe more of a nonprofit corporate question, but let's see if we can sort that out and at least touch on it next time.
Yeah, I mean, the ask is really for guidance at this point.
Yeah, and I think maybe the guidance needs to come a little bit outside of the TST, but let me talk to some other folks and get back and report back to the
That's
TST.
correct.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, everybody. See you again next time. Bye-bye.